What kind of leader are you? Are you the leader with the long screwdriver, tinkering in every single aspect of what's happening in your organization? Or are you the leader who's interested in the what, the purpose of the organization, but leaves the how to the brilliant minds that you've employed? Or are you the leader who's busy thinking about the fact that yours is bigger than mine? Whatever type of leader you are, regardless, whether it's in your school or your community or your organization, the impact of your leadership is profound, particularly on employee engagement. Gallup tell us that employee engagement worldwide is at an all-time low. People are feeling utterly unfulfilled at work, mostly due to the transactional nature of the type of work which they do. A way to increase engagement is to think about how your employees feel at work. How do they feel when they're walking through the door in the morning? That matters. Keeping your employees engaged means that they will stay with your organization and you can grow them into something great. I know from personal experience as a business graduate, climbing my way ferociously to the top of the organization, my job was to make money. And I did. I made lots of money. But deep down, I was utterly unfulfilled and miserable. I had to adopt a persona of arrogance in the quite macho culture I found myself in. Luckily, on a very rare trip home, because I was too busy to visit, one of my parents pulled me aside and said that they didn't recognize who I was anymore. Quite a shock. But it actually got me thinking that the values that I had picked up as a child had been totally put to the side in this need for recognition and this ambition to make money. Luckily, I got to pursue a very different career path, and I started studying the area of emotions and emotional intelligence and how it impacts on organizations, and in particularly decision-making. This has led me here today to talk to you about a piece of research we're doing looking at the aspect of leadership behaviors. I, along with my colleagues, Holcher, Olivier, and Holton, are working on building a set of behaviors for a new leadership paradigm called ego and eco-intelligence. Let me explain. The ego is something that the ancient Greeks described as I am, that essential part of the human need to create a sense of identity so that you can make sense of who you are in the world. You can draw a big circle around yourself and stand comfortably in it and say, this is my circle. This is what I stand for. And you can compare the size of your circle to the people who have their circle over there. The ego is hugely important. It helps us to create boundaries around who we are, figure out our identity. It's very dual in its logic. It's very black. It's either black or white. It's got a real sense of right and wrong, and will usually try and eliminate what it perceives morally as wrong. The ego is an essential part of creating purpose and drive in organizations, hence why we put such charismatic characters into power. We imagine they can do all sorts of things for us. They can drive success, they can lead us into spaces that we never really would probably do ourselves. So the ego is a hugely important thing. The problem with ego is that if it's overdone, it's a bit of a disaster. I know that my experience when I did work in industry, I was terribly unpopular. One of my bosses pulled me aside at one point and said that nobody wanted to manage me. Me? He said I was difficult, I was always angry and frustrated in every meeting, and nothing was right. And actually what had started to happen was this arrogance I spoke of earlier had just permeated into my being, and I had created my ego and identity based on this need for recognition and ambition. I hadn't built my ego on something sensible, like my values or my virtues, or all those good things that I had picked up as a child. And so it became my unraveling. When we trust leaders, we tend to follow them. And trust is a really important part of the equation for leaders. Green and Meister talk about the trust equation, and they talk about the fact that there are some key ingredients necessary to build trust: credibility, reliability, intimacy. But what can enhance or totally topple this over is the degree of self-orientation. And if the self-orientation, which is the overdone ego, is done too much, then people turn away. We all know the people who love to talk about themselves endlessly. So the stuckness of the ego is evident everywhere, especially in the corporate world. The Uber boss, Travis Kalanick, is suffering from that right now. The ego has become stuck. All of the skills and qualities that he had to create a whole new economy around the gig economy has now been his undoing. I see it all the time walking into organizations. You know that the ego orientation has become stuck when you see the oil painting of the CEO at reception, or the multitude of car parking spaces by the senior team who like a nice close proximity to the front door, or the top floor of this corporate head office with the plush carpets where they have a separate canteen away from the employees. That's when you know the ego's in trouble. The corporate graveyard of the financial crash is another good example of this ego stuckness. Silicon Valley are facing the same fate right now. What they have started off doing, which was around building and sharing and creating knowledge, has become about power and about money. Let's talk about eco. Eco-intelligent leadership is derived from the term ecological or ecosystem. And we know that in the ecosystem, living organisms relate to one another and their physical surroundings in order to survive. Eco-intelligent leadership is similar to this. You won't see an organogram. They won't hand you a big organizational hierarchy when you go in the door so you can figure out who's in charge here. They will be interested in how they can create bigger, better things with the differences they have in front of them. They will create interdependent but autonomous teams. They will think about markets that nobody has thought about. They will expand the boundaries. We have noticed in our research that the employee engagement, and in particular, is enhanced by this eco-intelligent leadership. We've noticed that eco-intelligent leaders are high on emotional intelligence. They're able to manage their emotions. They describe feeling really calm no matter what the situation is. And so they can be other regarding. They can focus on the others that are in front of them. They also have this tendency to want to serve. They have reached the pinnacle of feeling that they have enough for themselves, and now they want to do stuff for other people. They want to leave a legacy, not a monument or a building named after them. They want to leave a proper legacy which will be the benefit of others. Mandela, Abraham Lincoln would be great examples of such type of leaders. Howard Schultz from Starbucks, who took over 10 years ago, is another example of somebody who took a business which was stagnating and worked really hard on engaging his employees, ensuring that race relations were taken care of, ensuring that education was open and available to his people. The bottom line has reaped huge benefits because of this type of leadership. It's evident from the last 20 to 30 years that the world has leaned very much in an eco-intelligent fashion. Globalization, open door boundaries, free trade, the free flow of goods and people would suggest to us that eco-intelligent leadership is something that prevailed. And I know from sitting in a strategy module 20 years ago, that was the way forward. However, perhaps we leaned too far in the direction. And now, the world has swung violently in the opposite direction, towards ego-intelligent leadership. They want structure, they want boundaries, they want to preserve their identity, they want protectionism, they want nationalism, because they feel like they've lost something. Hence, we have Brexit, we have the current US superpowers. So it's not about setting up a false dichotomy here. I'm not suggesting that you should have lots of one and none of the other. There are merits and pitfalls to both of these types of leadership. We know that ego leadership is fantastic for speed and focus and getting things going and driving things through. We know that eco leadership is fantastic for listening to conflict, not dampening it down and creating consensus, but building something even bigger and better. There are pitfalls to both. Too much ego can ensure that there's rigidity, stuckness, as I described earlier. Too much eco, and it all becomes a bit drifty. Lack of decision-making, lack of focus. So what do you need? So the question I posed to you at the start was, what kind of leader are you? That's an essential part of deciding how many of these behaviors that you need or not. Becoming self-aware, figuring out who you really are, figuring out what your values and your virtues are, will allow you to build up an identity that's set on a very solid foundation. This foundation will then help you to decide what are your areas that what behaviors do you need more of? Do you need more ego? Do you need more eco? One could go back to Travis Kalanick and say, perhaps there was too much ego here. How about some eco-intelligent leadership? Instead of fighting every single area that you go into, why not work with the stakeholders that are there and try and create something even bigger and better? So it's really all about what works for you as a leader. And this isn't a cloak that you put on and it's on indefinitely. It's something that you use every time you walk into a situation and you say, do I need more ego here or more eco? So you can decide. For us, it's going to be a very interesting journey as researchers, finding out how these behaviors impact on employee engagement and hopefully making our organizations a much better and more interesting place to work. Thank you.